Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of Corel Ghislaine, or something like it. Yeah, it's Monday. I started part 3 of Forged Darkness. I read like chapters 11, 12, and 13, and oh boy, do we have something to talk about. So, yeah, I'm back. I'm glad I'm back. Well, weekend has been rough, to put it mildly, and I'm still struggling with a lot of other personal shit going down at the moment, but once again, reading and talking about it is kind of what keeps me sane at the moment, so there's that. And yeah, let's get into it, because there's a lot. Cheers. All right, so here we are. And yeah, I found like compared to the first like half of the novel, because obviously this is sort of the halfway point, stakes are getting raised immensely. And not all of this makes a lot of made a lot of sense to me all the time, but yeah, we meet more people that we've known before and that we've met before, and yeah, that's not always a good thing either. So, what what do we really need to talk about? We need to talk about the idea of the Azathanai, I guess, and how they may become gods or are gods or whatever. Like this idea of them being gods in waiting, I found like really interesting. Then, unfortunately, we meet that one Azathanai that you know, I don't know. We meet Olar Ethil, and that's weird because holy shit, she's weird and not very nice. At least she says so herself, and you know, you just kill someone. um, but I found this like super interesting because Steven Erikson has always been great at like describing weird fantasy species. Like all of the ones that show up in the Malazan Book of the Fallen are awesome. Those could change them all for Sail and so forth. That's great. But the Azathanai are like one level above that when it comes to weirdness. And I just really, really appreciated what he does there with Olar Ethil being like sort of this like maybe slightly mother goddess like person with all the like death aspect and the other weird aspects that those like female deities get ascribed in our world, in mythology and mythology studies, because oftentimes we don't know that much about these kind of like early on cults in a way. And she does have some of those aspects apparently with fire and all of that in a way. But it's still weird. It's still like super weird, and I don't think I understood fully what happened there. On her relationship to Burn is still one that I also need to figure out, I guess. We'll see. So far, it is still not very clear how she is related to Burn or not related to Burn. It's weird. An interesting thing though happens. I guess we got to talk about that some more later on. Is how Draconis actually acknowledges Erethan as his son, and once again in that like medieval way of things, which, yeah, this idea that he has to be acknowledged by his father to be accepted, otherwise he'll be seen as a bastard and so forth. We learn that Olar Ethil is the mother of envy, spite, and malice, and we're going to come back to that later on today because holy shit. We see Erethan becoming more like aware of things. I appreciate that. He seems to be a cool dude, despite all the shit that he's gone through. And we get more and more information on Draconis being like at least related to the Azathanai, if not one of them. Who knows? And yeah, but mostly that whole like these symbols of birth and so forth. That was weird to read. A lot of that was like really weird to read for me. I don't know. I might have to go through that again at some point or see where it is going in the next couple of chapters. But holy shit, that was a lot of weird stuff going down in a way. But I feel like the more important things are happening in chapter 12 and 13. Not like not the more important things when it comes to how to say like the overall plot, but this time around, yeah, the Osirk chapter basically I feel is the interesting bit here because we see more and more of the manipulations of that like lower rank of the soldiers that see like the reform of the rebellion, the reform of the Legion as like their way back into power, or their general way into power, which is as I said before, is like an interesting thing because that's how systems like class systems get overturned, is when the ruling class has to give power to lower classes in exchange for their like participation in wars. For example, as I said that before, is like one thing that you see when you look at, for example, the history of the Peloponnesian War and the Athenians building their fleet, and suddenly the rowers getting more power, but more payment, and even beginning to get some representation in what you might call Athenian democracy, which is not exactly the same as our kind of democracy nowadays. But that's sort of the point. We see something similar here. The Legion was needed for the wars against the Forucan, who I think are for Assail. It was needed there, and now you have all these people standing around, like hanging around with like nowhere to go, and they've tasted power because they had power while the war was still on. Now you need to figure out what to do with them. It's a problem with armies. It's both with mercenaries and with like standing armies. Once you don't need that standing army, you still have a lot of these soldiers. And there's an interesting talk about that when Urisander talks to Sarah, I think. It was her when he explains that soldiers should go away because soldiers, by being soldiers and fighting through wars, have seen atrocities and so forth, and have left certain aspects of social norms and stuff behind. That's just how it is, and it is very, very difficult for a society to look at its soldiers and veterans, and it's something that we see in everyday war, in every country, nowadays as well. It's like how do we deal with our veterans, people that actually went and did all the insanely like challenging and whatnot things that soldiers do and sacrifice so much for it, but in the end they come back and it's very difficult to integrate them again in society. And yeah, to see that also on a large scale in that medieval setting of Carcanas, of Corel Galen, I found is like interesting. The other thing that we saw is the beginning of that chapter with Osirk taking that Teist girl, Rina, something like that is her name. Yeah, yeah, Rina, oh, God, I don't know. Anyway, the whole scene I found was like doubly interesting because first of all, it really clearly shows the idea of privilege, of power, privilege of rank in a feudal society. He is the lord. He's the son of Urisander. He's a young nobleman, basically, and all of that. And he can basically do whatever the fuck he wants in these areas, or at least he clearly believes he can, which is why he takes that girl and maybe And this is where it gets interesting, because the question there is he seducing her or is she seducing him? And because he is so dumb and stuck up in his ideas of privilege and whatnot, he just doesn't even realize it until that point at the end, when he realizes it, that it was maybe basically her and seducing him and not the other way round. I found that like a very interesting scene, because it sort of really makes Osiric out to be an idiot in a way. And there's something that I found really interesting after that, when he talks to Orisanda, and Orisanda basically tells him that he won't give him the Legion because the Legion is obviously not a thing that can be inherited. And they're talking about like acknowledging his son, not acknowledging his son, obviously he has done that, but giving him some measure of respect and stuff like that. And I found this super interesting, because when Osiric shows up in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, right? When he shows up there, it is in those scenes with Lorik. Now, I have no idea if Lorik is the child of that scene that we've just read in chapter 12. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? But the point is, Orisander's treatment of his son Osiric is so close and mirrors so closely Osiric's treatment of his son Lorik, one level down. So you just see once again this idea of like how such things are perpetuated through books, basically, even through books and like through millennia in a way. Which, comes back to that whole idea that childhood is a crucial time in everyone's life, and the traumas of childhood will stay with us all the way. I feel that's sort of, I guess, one of the two or three like main takeaways that I've had from the Malazan world at this point is, one, childhood and childhood traumas are crucial and determine a lot about what happens to us in later life, because it's so difficult to overcome them. Two, we as intelligent species are unfortunately still very dumb and tend to destroy our environment by overhunting, overusing resources and so forth. And the only way out of all this dumbness and all this stupidity that we display as a species, the only way to get all of that is to show empathy and compassion, actually overcome our like human nature. Those are the three main things of Stephen Erickson's writing, I guess. At this point, there's more, obviously. There's lasers and fireballs and other stuff too, but that's sort of like the three main thrusts of a lot of his characters and things that happen. And that third part, the overcoming by showing empathy and compassion in a way, is the part that I really liked about chapter 12, when Urisander actually comes down into the city and talks to the smith, Gurren, I think is his name. Yeah. And we have that whole thing with the like Gurren's wife being like one of Urisander's officers, a captain who died defending him, and all that blame in there and everything, and how they still managed to kind of make up for that and actually clears at least some parts of the troubles between them at the end. And that's showing, especially when Gurren says that he still doesn't want the healing because he actually wants to die and go meet his wife again. And Arisander accepting that. And make no mistake, he's the lord of that place. He could totally command the other dude, and he doesn't. And that shows a lot of respect, and something that is important here is like the compassion in there to understand that this is the only way for this person to, have some hope in like that hope of meeting his dead wife again. So there's that, and I did like that. I did also like the part how it was well done, basically. For I think the part about her, who I still fuck up the name, but and her lover, or beloved, and the person the man she wanted to marry, and then Osage kills him. But him being something of an abusive person, and you have all the makings of a toxic and like deeply toxic and abusive relationship there, because like the outside sees that he's probably not good for her, and then she doesn't get to tell that story because she's like been beaten and all of that. But she, in her mind, because she was still caught in that abusive relationship, she was still at that point where she thought that it wasn't really his fault and all these other things, and she would have like stayed with him in a way. In that, I found that it's one of these amazing things that make Malazan say good and that make Forge of Darkness also really good, is that we have that Steven Erikson is really good at like showing so much about real world relationships, characters, and so forth, in so few lines on a subplot of something that is possibly never going to show up again, and not like having any consequences for the overall plot, because that's how the universe works. There is no just huge overall plot in most that touches most of our lives, but then again it kind of does sometimes. That doesn't devalue any of the people that are not touched by what you might call like larger events of history, and that was one example that I found like really touching this time around. Yeah, so Osirk, what a jerk. But still, kind of understandable, because he lives under the shadow of his father, and he has the Hanral talking all this bullshit to him. And he's young and he's insecure and he doesn't understand it, and so he falls for all of that crap. And then when he's a father himself, he just treats his son the same way, because some people never learn. But I've already said that. So there's that. What else did I really like? I really liked that opening talk about the gods of Kataspala of chapter 13, when you see the whole like fucked up war of Ursander's legion doing like killing all the deniers, who are like apparently the believers in the river god and everything, and them just being peaceful like people living in the forest. And we see all these atrocities, and they're terrible, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But first, that opening when we just get told about about Kataspala's gods, that being colors, and how he views the world, and how him being that kind of artist, a true artist, don't even needs to actually put paint on canvas or whatever, because it's so much in like his imagination and mind. And I feel that's an important aspect to creating art of any type, is that there is always that image of the piece of art in the mind of the artist, and it's almost, and that's sort of where it is at. It's not so much about actually finishing the actual painting or the actual novel or poem or what have you. It's really very much about having that vision in the first place, and I liked that a lot. I also liked a lot that like his outrage against the murder of the child, and him like imagining how he will paint that portrait of that dead baby, and how art should also like is something of an accusation in that regard, and how he just like thinks about that and making that again and again and again, because he wants to move people, wants people to realize how terrible they are. That, I guess, is a really important thing as well, the impetus of artists to move people. Anyway, I really enjoyed that. What I found interesting is the scene from the soldier's point of view, where we meet that one guard that got punched in the face by I forgot his name, the caravan guard that was protecting Orphantal, and he is now a soldier with those people, and he's very much um, uh, suffering from his deformity now because his face was broken and shit. And that really reminded me of that scene or that character in Dead House Gates, and then the Bone Hunters, I think. Yeah, the Bone Hunters. The guy that got his face bitten by Fiddler's horse and then becomes that horse hating servant in of the goddess of Poliel in the Bone Hunters. This idea that like sometimes people who aren't actually nice people to start with, but how even those people suffer and through some seemingly random act. Right, it's not fully random in this case, obviously, because he challenged that captain's authority and everything, but it's still something that is like, in the grand scheme of things, not exactly a huge event, but it has incredible consequences for him as a person, and that I feel is like once again one of these important aspects that Stephen Erickson manages to show there from time to time. That idea of how small events have huge consequences for the person, for the individual they befall. Obviously, that idea of him, feeling that his inside is now visible to everyone, that idea that usually we hide our soul through masks and whatnot. Yeah, there's that too. But for me, more important was that idea of the consequences. It just like felt like a parallel to that event, those events in Dead House Gates and Bone Hunters. All right, so there's that. Now let's talk about the ending when things kind of went all off the rails with envy and spite and malice. So we've learned that envy and spite and malice are daughters of Draconis and Olar Ethiel. And they are aspected. And they are, I mean, they seem to be really just like really spiteful or like terrible children. First torturing Malice, then trying to hide the death of Malice by killing everyone. And going about it in this brutal way. That I was just like, I wasn't expecting that, I guess. It's like, I mean, I've obviously met both envy and spite in different parts of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, but seeing them as like these really bratty kids that didn't suddenly decide to, without any compunction, kill everyone in in Draconis' house. It's like, how old are they actually? The younger sisters of Erethan. And we learned that they have abused, apparently, Arathan in terrible ways. And they've always been terrible. Which, I don't know, is just creepy in a way. This idea that you have a child, or have children, and they are actually evil. And then the question of whether that is just... whether that is because of the names that Draconis gave them, or if there's some other thing there that made them that. I mean, said that they are aspected, so the name is important there. But the question is, was the name there first, or was the aspect there first? But still, I was just shocked by the whole thing, by how much power they have, and how they just like from one moment to the other decide to just go and kill everyone and then just do it. I don't know. That was just like slightly unexpected how things, went so out of hand in such a short time. So, yeah, I'm going to finish part 3 tomorrow, so it'll be interesting to see where things are heading now. Like, civil war seems to be almost unavoidable at this point. People have died. The army is already reassembling, sort of, because it has to. And Arisander, who seems to be a really nice dude, will probably have to figure out how to avoid civil war, which he can't. And so yeah, it'll be interesting to see where all of that is going. Yeah. So that's it for tonight. I'll be back tomorrow with more of it. And until then, have a great Monday and have a great week. Cheers.